The Cowboys season is winding down with just 2 games left, and they're officially out of the playoff race. At this point, I think it's time for the team to embrace some changes, not by losing games on purpose because no organization operates that way, but by shifting their focus to 2025. The priority should now be on developing the younger players and giving opportunities to the long-term options, rather than sticking with players who might not even be part of the roster next season. The challenge, of course, lies in the fact that the head coach is still fighting to keep his job. Naturally, he's going to prioritize the players that give him the best chance to win games right now and prove to ownership that he deserves to stay. This misalignment between organizational goals and the coaching staff's objectives has been a lingering issue for the Cowboys all season and will likely come to the forefront in these final games. So, should the Cowboys commit to playing the younger guys in the final games? If so, some real changes need to happen in terms of who gets on the field. For instance, there are some key names who should be getting more snaps as the season wraps up. And if you want that to happen, stick with me, because we're going to break it all down. What's up, buddies? Welcome to the NFL Playbook Cowboys. If you are new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button. This is all about America's team. First up is Tyler Smith, the team's first-round pick at left tackle. Now, I'm not saying Smith has been playing at an elite level or that he's been perfect. Far from it. He's had his share of penalties, and yes, his rookie season hasn't quite lived up to expectation. But let's be honest. There's no argument to be made that continuing to give Chuma Edoga snaps at left tackle in meaningless games is the better option. It's just not. Smith needs work, and we all know he hasn't been good enough yet. However, he's shown flashes of potential. Let's talk about Chuma Edoga for a moment, because honestly, it's not like he's been a standout performer either. This back-and-forth approach of giving Tyler Smith some snaps, then pulling him out the moment he makes a mistake, only to let Edoga make the same, or sometimes worse, mistakes without consequence. That just doesn't make sense to me. Looking at the recent games and breaking down the snap counts, the numbers tell an interesting story. For example, Smith had that rough game with 4 penalties, but since then, not a single one. When you compare the stats, Smith has given up fewer sacks and fewer hits, and has nearly identical hurries and run-blocking grades as Edoga. In fact, they've had almost the exact same number of pass-blocking snaps, with Edoga logging just 2 more. So why the double standard? I know there's a segment of fans out there who weren't thrilled with Tyler Smith's pick in the first place, and I get that. Maybe they expected more from a first-rounder, but sometimes it feels like those critics are hoping he fails rather than rooting for his development. That's probably more of a social media thing than anything else, but it raises a bigger question. Why wouldn't you play a young, talented, albeit raw, first-round pick who clearly needs reps to develop? Instead, the team continues to roll with Edoga, a player who doesn't offer much upside for the future. At a certain point, the long-term picture has to matter more than trying to win games in Week 17 and 18. Especially with the Eagles as a tough matchup. Put Smith out there, let him take on that challenge, and he'll be better for it in the long run. So, should Tyler Smith start against the Eagles? I'm adamant that he should. In fact, I think it would be flat out wrong not to start him, but I'll let you weigh in. Head to the comment section and share your opinion, because I believe in giving you a say in this too. Next, I want to discuss Hunter Luepke, who is an interesting case. Earlier in the season, when Dak Prescott was more involved in the offense, Luepke showcased some solid potential. He's had just 20 touches this year, but here's the standout stat. 16 or 17 of those have resulted in first downs. That's an incredible efficiency rate, even if those aren't flashy, big yardage plays. What's even more notable is that Luepke has already taken over pass protection duties, a role previously held by Ezekiel Elliott, simply because he's been better at it. So why isn't he getting short yardage opportunities as well? Wouldn't it be worth finding out if Luepke can be your go-to guy in those situations? Sure, there was the fumble against the Dolphins on that crucial 4th and 1 at the goal line, and since then, the Cowboys have barely used him. Instead, they've leaned on Ezekiel Elliott for those short yardage plays. But let's face it, Elliott isn't going to be here next year. That ship has sailed. So why not give Luepke a chance to prove himself? Let him take on that role and see if he can be the short yardage solution for next season. After all, he'll still be under contract and ready to contribute. It's a low-risk move. Let Luepke play that John Kuhn-style role for Mike McCarthy. If he steps up, it fills a critical role for the future. If not, at least you'll know. What do you really have to lose by giving him a bigger role in these final games? Now, shifting to the offense as a whole, let's talk about the receiving core, because there are some questions there too. Jonathan Mingo and Ryan Flournoy should be lumped together as one here. With CeeDee Lamb banged up and playing through his injury, and Jalen Tolbert dealing with his gruesome finger injury, a dislocation, hyperextension, and punctured skin situation, it's tough to gauge how reliable the unit will be. On top of that, Brandon Cooks is, well, he is who he is at this point. He's a veteran, reliable in certain situations, but let's face it, he's getting older. For me, it's time to shift focus to the younger players. That's why I'd like to see more snaps for Jonathan Mingo and Ryan Flournoy. Look, the Cowboys spent a 4th-round pick on Mingo, and so far he's got just 2 catches on 11 targets. That's a brutal stat line. Now, not all of that is on him. There's definitely been some quarterback inconsistency to factor in, but it's still not good enough. On the other hand, Flournoy has been a bit more consistent recently, showing some solid flashes. He still needs to clean up the fumbling issues, but overall, he's trending in the right direction. The bottom line? I want to give both of these guys more opportunities. Let them get some meaningful reps to show what they can do and ideally build some momentum heading into next season. These are young players who will be part of the roster next year, so why not invest in their development now? Now, let's quickly touch on Marshawn Kneeland. He's another young player who needs more time on the field. So far, his contributions have been pretty modest, just 1 tackle for loss and a handful of pressures. He hasn't been a game changer, but it's worth noting that he's still recovering from an injury which has kept him on a bit of a pitch count. The challenge with Kneeland is the depth on the defensive line. Carl Lawson and Chauncey Golston have both been playing really well, which complicates the rotation. Still, Kneeland is a second-round pick, and you have to prioritize his development. I'd like to see him get as many snaps as possible as the Cowboys wrap up the season, even if that means cutting back a bit on other players' reps. Looking ahead, it's all about giving these younger guys a chance to prove themselves. Whether it's on offense with Mingo and Flournoy or on defense with Kneeland, the focus should be on the future. Now let's shift back to football and focus on defense, specifically Justin Rogers. If you missed the news, the Cowboys brought him back late last week after picking him up off the Bengals practice squad. He's now signed to the active roster but didn't play last week. This puts the team in an interesting spot moving forward. Lately, the defensive line has been stepping up. Linval Joseph, for instance, has significantly improved in the second half of the season. The entire defensive front has seen better performances recently. Carlos Watkins has been reliable, which is a big contrast to earlier struggles with players like Jordan Phillips, who didn't seem motivated to contribute. What makes Justin Rogers intriguing is his youth. Now that he's back with the team, he's someone who could be part of the Cowboys' plans for next season. Developing him further in these last games could pay dividends down the road. It's another opportunity for the Cowboys to look ahead and see what pieces they can build around for the future. Justin Rogers is one of just 2 defensive tackles, alongside Maisie Smith, who are guaranteed to be under contract with the Cowboys next year. Rogers will likely be on a very affordable deal, perhaps as an exclusive rights free agent, which balances out the roster numbers for next season. Given his status, it makes sense to give him some snaps and reps in these final games. At this stage of the season, those opportunities for young players are far more valuable than sticking solely with the veterans. Of course, it's a balancing act. Veterans may not be thrilled about losing snaps, but sometimes the big picture decisions for the organization have to take priority. The Cowboys are in that position now where the focus should shift toward developing younger talent and preparing for next season. One final player to discuss here is Juanyeh Thomas. This, of course, depends on his health, as he's still recovering from that knee injury. But every time Thomas gets on the field, he has a knack for making things happen. He's a playmaker, plain and simple. The Cowboys have typically used Thomas as a deep safety, which seems to be where he thrives. At the same time, Donovan Wilson deserves credit for his recent improvement. Over the past few weeks, Wilson has significantly stepped up his game compared to earlier in the season. It's been a noticeable change, and he deserves praise for it. As for Malik Hooker, he's been steady. I wouldn't call him a standout player, but he's reliable. Last season may have been better for him, but he's still a solid contributor. However, there are a few things to consider here as well. Juanyeh Thomas has shown flashes of being a difference maker, and I'd like to see if he can handle a starting role next season. Can he outplay Malik Hooker? Can he step up and consistently make those impact plays? These are questions you need answers to, and the final games are the perfect time to evaluate him further. Now, I want to hear from you. Who's a player you'd like to see get more playing time for in these final 2 weeks of the season for the Cowboys? Should the Cowboys be giving these younger players more opportunities? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.